Welcome back to the South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast by Ohio State fans for Ohio State fans. From the West Coast, I'm your host, Zach Moore. Today is Monday, May 25th, 2026, Memorial Day. And thank you for joining me while I talk to myself about the star potential of your 2026 Ohio State football Buckeyes. Now, any Buckeye fan will tell you that the foundation of a title contending team at Ohio State starts with a core of star players. They are the ceiling raisers of any Ohio State contending team. Now, X's and O's are important, but in Columbus, it's always been about the Jimmies and the Joes. I mean, look no further than 2024 is proof of that. That postseason run was not really about schematic advantages. In fact, I'd argue that it wasn't until the coaches got the hell out of the way and let the stars do their thing that team began to play at its potential. It was all about the star power of that 2024 team and Ohio State just overwhelming opponents with superior personnel. I think the same can be said of the 2014 national championship team as well. So today, I want to examine whether the 2026 Buckeyes have the necessary star power, the talent at the very top, to survive a brutal regular season schedule and make another run to a national championship. And I'm going to take a semi-educated guess at which returning Buckeyes from the 2025 team have the best chance at elevating to star status in 2026. Now, I'm going to save a discussion about potential stars from the group of incoming transfers and freshmen for another day, though I've already kind of touched on that in some previous pods. If you're a regular listener of this podcast, then you know I'm bullish on players like Chris Henry Jr., Earl Little Jr., James Smith, and Quay Russaw. Those will be very important players with star potential for the Buckeyes this season. I'd also throw Terry Moore and Christian Allegro into that group as well, but those aren't the players I'm going to focus on today. However, spoiler alert, I think that group is more than just floor raisers. I think there is a star player or two among that group who can help raise the ceiling of the 2026 Buckeyes. Now, how do I define star player? I don't think we need to overthink this. It's self-evident. I would define a star player as one, highly productive, so putting up the necessary stats. Two, a player that shines in high leverage moments in the biggest games. And three, is widely recognized as among the best at his position in the country. Now, for the sake of this discussion, I've grouped returning Buckeyes into two categories. The first is highly productive returning starters. The second is key reserves that flashed last season and will be first-time starters this season. And between the two groups, I have 11 players that I believe have star potential for the Buckeyes in 2026. So let's start with the first category, returning highly productive starters from 2025. There are 8 players on this list, and I put them in order of the likelihood that they will be star players in 2026. Of course, we have to start with junior receiver Jeremiah Smith. Assuming health, Smith will be a unanimous All-American for the third straight season, a favorite for the Blitnikoff Award, and a Heisman candidate. And he will shatter the school records for career receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns. If everything goes to plan, Smith will own those records by mid-October. I mean, he only needs 43 receptions, 311 receiving yards, and 9 touchdown catches to own those school records. Now, naturally, PFF has Smith listed at number 1 in their top 10 list of returning receivers for 2026. The next player on my list is redshirt sophomore quarterback Julian Sayin, who led the country in completion percentage last season. Sayin's 77% completion percentage was the third highest completion percentage in college football history. He was also a Heisman finalist last year, as we remember. With 3,600 passing yards and 32 touchdown passes, Sayin had an excellent first season as a starter. I think actually far too many fans left the Sayin bandwagon after what I would call a mildly disappointing postseason. Sayin was not at his best against Indiana and Miami, to be sure, but the dreadful play of his offensive line and the absence of a bona fide offensive coordinator were far more to blame for the struggles of the Ohio State offense in those two games. And let's not forget, Sayin was only a damn redshirt freshman last season. I think he's going to have a monster 2026. I fully expect him to be back in New York as a Heisman finalist. And PFF agrees with me. They have Sayin listed at number 1 on their top 10 list of returning quarterbacks for 2026. At number 3 on my list of returning starters that have star potential this season is senior left tackle Austin Sareveld. In 810 snaps, Sareveld finished 2025 with an overall PFF grade of 83.5, which led all Buckeye offensive linemen, a team-high run blocking grade of 83.3, and a solid pass blocking grade of 73.7. Those were all huge improvements over his 2024 grades, which were in the 60s across the board. Last season, Sareveld was voted second team All-Big Ten by the coaches and to the third team by the media. On their list of top 10 returning offensive tackles for 2026, PFF has Sareveld rated number 6. I think there's a good chance Sareveld will outplay that rating this season, though it is interesting. There is a chance he could end up as a starting right guard for the offensive line this season if Ian Moore can play well enough in fall practices to grab that left tackle job. And if that happens, I think Sareveld could be the best interior offensive lineman in the country because he's more naturally suited to play guard than tackle. At number 4 on my list of returning starters that could blossom into star players this season is junior safety Jalen McClain. McClain led all Ohio State defensive players in snaps with 708, and his PFF grades across the board last season were outstanding: 78.1 overall, 77.6 against the run, 87 in tackling, which was second only to Sonny Styles, by the way, and 77.1 in coverage. There really isn't anything McClain can't do well. McClain finished last season with 53 tackles, 3 PBUs, and was voted third team All-Big Ten by the media. I think his value last season was in being a smart, reliable last line of defense for Matt Patricia. I mean, how many times did McClain make tackles in the open field at the second level to prevent a big play last season? We saw it over and over again. We saw it several times in the Michigan game last season. Now, with Caleb Downs off to the NFL, the next step for McClain is to evolve into more of a playmaker at safety. So I'm talking about more pass breakups, interceptions, forced fumbles, tackles at or behind the line of scrimmage. And I think he'll be up to the task. I think Jalen McClain is going to have a monster 2026. Now, PFF has not released its top 10 list of returning safeties for 2026, but I would be stunned if McClain doesn't make that list. At number 5 on this list is senior left guard Luke Montgomery. In Montgomery's first season as a full-time starter, he was voted second team All-Big Ten by both the coaches and the media, and he was a stalwart on the offensive line for the Buckeyes last season, playing 837 snaps, which was second on the team only to Carson Hinsmond. And his PFF grades were very good: 73.4 overall, 73.5 in run blocking, and 70 in pass blocking. Montgomery was a 4-star prospect out of Findlay, Ohio, the number 120 player in the 2022 class, according to 24/7 Sports. And, we started to see flashes of the player that he could be toward the end of the 2024 season. And as a true sophomore, he was the starting left guard for the Buckeyes in the national semifinal win over Texas and in the CFP championship win over Notre Dame. Now, coming off a season in which he was voted second team All-Big Ten by both the coaches and media, I think Montgomery has a chance to be one of the best interior offensive linemen in the country. And PFF agrees. They have Montgomery at number 4 in their top 10 returning offensive guards for 2026. At number 6, I have sophomore running back Bo Jackson. Jackson is coming off an impressive freshman season in which he ran for over 1,000 yards at 6.1 yards per carry. He also caught 19 passes for another 200 yards at 10.5 yards per reception. Now, Jackson did not play in the season opener against Texas, and he was not the full-time starter until late September. So most of those stats I just cited happened kind of late September, early October, and onward. Now, except for one area, Jackson's PFF grades last season were outstanding: 86.6 overall, 85.9 in the run game, and 76.9 in receiving. I mean, the only area where he didn't grade out well was pass blocking, with a grade of 41.9. And look, that's not a good grade, but it's typical of a young back to struggle in that area. It normally takes a little bit of time for a running back to be a good blocker. Now, few freshmen in Ohio State history had better debuts in a Michigan game than Jackson. He finished with 166 total yards on 26 touches in the win over Michigan last November. And I thought Jackson ran pretty well in the postseason losses to Indiana and Miami as well. I mean, he averaged 5 yards per carry in both of those games. I actually thought he was underutilized in both of those games. Jackson was voted second team All-Big Ten by the coaches and to the third team by the media. On their list of top 10 running backs for 2026, PFF has Jackson at number 8. Now, Jackson missed all of spring practices this year after having a minor procedure on his shoulder. He's expected to be ready for the season, though. Now, Jackson needs to improve at making tacklers miss at the second level. I would say that's the other area of improvement, along with improving his pass blocking. And he's going to have to split carries with Isaiah West and potentially freshman legend Bay. But I think a huge season is in the offing for Jackson this year. I think he is going to be a star for the 2026 Buckeyes. At number 7, and this is where for me there's a little bit of a cutoff, and I'm less certain about the star potential, and that's defensive end Kenyatta Jackson. There's a ton riding on this season, both personally for Jackson and for the defense as a whole. Jackson was underutilized his first 3 seasons in Columbus. 2025 was his first as a starter, and 2026 is going to be his last chance to really deliver on his potential. And look, Jackson is the only real proven pass rushing threat for the Buckeyes this season. I mean, no other edge player on the roster has his bona fides. In 549 snaps, Jackson finished last season second on the team in pressures with 45 and tied with Arvell Reese for second on the team in sacks with 6.5. Most of his PFF grades last year were solid, but not spectacular. 72.7 overall, 73.8 against the run, and 68.9 in pass rush. But his 55.3 tackling grade leaves a little something to be desired. That is clearly an area for improvement. When I look at Jackson's size, 6'6", 265 pounds, and athleticism, and compare that to 45 pressures and 6.5 sacks, frankly, I'm left wanting more. Now, I did like the way he finished last season with a combined 14 pressures against Michigan, Indiana, and Miami. He had a sack against the Wolverines and a sack against the Hoosiers. Jackson was not voted to any of the all Big Ten teams last season, and he did not make PFF's top 10 list of edge defenders for 2026. It's a small leap of faith, but I think there is a 10 to 12 sack season inside of Kenyatta Jackson. And I believe that's what we're going to get from him in 2026. Finally, at number 8, I have senior center Carson Hinsman. Hinsman led all Buckeyes in snaps last season with 841. He was another stalwart on that offensive line. He finished 2025 with an overall PFF grade of 73.6, a run blocking grade of 71.9, and a pass blocking grade of 76. Those were all career high PFF grades and huge improvements over his 2024 and 2023 grades, especially in pass blocking. Hinsman's pass blocking grades were in the 40s, both in 2024 and 2023. Last season, Hinsman was voted third team All-Big Ten by the media, and he was actually voted first team All-American by the American Football Coaches Association. That's one of the lesser-known All-American teams, but it's an All-American team nonetheless. Hinsman has 2,196 snaps under his belt. He's played a lot of football at Ohio State. He was a 4-star prospect out of Harmon, Wisconsin, the number 188 overall player in the 2022 recruiting class, according to 24/7 Sports. Now, he redshirted in 2022 and was forced into a starting role as a redshirt freshman in 2023, where he took a lot of lumps and ended up losing his starting job for the Cotton Bowl that season. He spent the first half of 2024 as a reserve, then regained his starting job at center after Seth McLaughlin tore his Achilles in late November. Hinsman made PFF's top 10 list for centers in 2026. He's rated number 10 on that list. And like Kenyatta Jackson, Hinsman's a player that I'm a little less certain about his star potential. Now, some of you may be wondering about Jermaine Matthews Jr. and Brandon Inniss and why I didn't mention him on this list. They were both starters last season, as we know. Matthews was second only to Jalen McClain in defensive snaps with 695. Inniss played 444 snaps as slot receiver. I think it's on the table that both are solid contributors and productive players as seniors this season, but neither took the leap in 2025 that we had hoped, and their play dipped as the season went along. And I think what we glimpsed last season is a clear ceiling for both players. Matthews had a few more moments than Inniss, the interception against Arch Manning in the opener against Texas, the 2 turnovers that he forced against Illinois. But I think UGA transfer Dominic Kelly looks poised to eventually take Matthews' spot on the outside and move Matthews into the slot. Inniss, as we remember, had a huge touchdown catch just before halftime against Michigan, but many of his opportunities last season went to Max Clare, who was the de facto slot receiver for the offense, even though technically Clare was a tight end. And I tend to think Innis's opportunities will suffer again this season as a result of incoming transfers. In this case, there are two, Devin McCune and Kyle Parker. I said this before. I think the fact that the coaching staff brought two veteran slot receivers in from the portal tells you everything you need to know about how they view Innis as a playmaker. So that's why I didn't include Matthews and Innis on this list of potential stars for 2026. So among the returning starters from a year ago, I feel extremely confident that Jeremiah Smith, Julian Sain, Austin Saraveld, Jalen McClain, Luke Montgomery, and Bo Jackson will shine as stars for the 2026 Buckeyes. I'm not quite as sure about Kenyatta Jackson and Carson Hinsman, but there's definitely a path, I think, to stardom for both of those players this season. Okay, let's look at the second category of returning players from last season. These are key reserves that flashed in 2025 and will start for the first time this season. Now, I have three players on this list, all from the defense, that could elevate to star status in 2026, in much the same way Arvell Reese did last season. By the way, I didn't see any offensive players that fit into this category. To me, the only players that really fit here are defensive players. Now, this group requires a leap of faith because none of them has been a full-time starter yet. But they did show us flashes, more than one last season, and the recruiting pedigree and physical tools are clearly there. It's also just kind of a general rule at Ohio State with the way it recruits and the track record of development that you can count on one or two players to take a huge leap from reserve to star player almost every season. We see that almost every year at Ohio State. So the first player on this list for me is sophomore cornerback Devin Sanchez. From Houston, Sanchez was a 5-star prospect, the number 1 prep cornerback in the country, and number 5 overall player in the 2025 class, according to 24/7 Sports. At 6'2", 198 pounds, Sanchez is reminiscent of the big, rangy, athletic corners Urban Meyer used to recruit at Ohio State. In 323 snaps last season, Sanchez, he took his lumps as a freshman. His PFF grades are about what you would expect from a true freshman: 60.8 overall, 59.5 in coverage, and 64.8 against the run. Not great, but not horrible either. And Sanchez finished 2025 with his best performance of the season in the playoff quarterfinal against Miami. Sanchez played 43 snaps against the Canes, finishing with 2 tackles, 1 pass breakup, and an overall PFF grade of 70.9, his best tackling grade of the season of 79.1, and his second best coverage grade of the season of 70.7. Sanchez spent most of this spring working against Jeremiah Smith and holding his own in that matchup, by the way. We saw a lot of video clips of Sanchez and Smith going at it, and Sanchez was holding his own in that matchup. I thought Sanchez looked the part in the spring game. He was smothering in coverage. He is going to start opposite Jermaine Matthews at corner. And if you're in the wait-and-see camp with Sanchez, okay, fine. I mean, I get it. But I think he's going to explode this season and be among the best 3 or 4 corners in the country. I'm on alert for an All-American season from Sanchez in 2026. He's dripping with talent, and by all accounts, he is ready to be the first elite corner the program has had since Jeff Okudah. The next player on my list of 2025 reserves that have star potential in 2026 is junior defensive tackle Edric Houston. Now, many of us believe 2025 would be Houston's breakout season. I was certainly in that camp. But an injury on the first day of training camp set Houston back. In a timeshare with Tywone Malone last season, Houston played 324 snaps, finishing with an overall grade of 59.6, a rush defense grade of 60, a tackling grade of 60.2, and a pass rush grade of 67.6. It took most of the season for Houston to claw his way back into the starting lineup, but to his credit, he eventually did. He started the playoff quarterfinal against Miami, and like Devin Sanchez, had his best performance of the season. In 50 snaps against the Canes, Houston finished with a career-high 5 tackles and 1.5 sacks. At 6'3", 292 pounds out of Atlanta, Houston was a high 4-star prospect, the number 33 overall player according to 24/7 Sports. Now, he was recruited as a defensive end, but Larry Johnson moved him inside to tackle when he got to Columbus. We forget that Houston was only a true sophomore last season. An interior defensive line, even for a prospect as talented as Houston, is a developmental position. Most players at that position need at least 2 seasons in the weight room at the FBS level before they can start playing to their potential. I am extremely bullish on Edric Houston. I think he's going to blossom into a star this season for Larry Johnson. He's going to be the best player in one of the strongest position groups on this team, interior defensive line. And I think he's going to establish himself as one of the best defensive tackles in the country this season. The last player on this list, and this is where I have a little bit of a cutoff from the first two, is junior linebacker Peyton Pierce. Now, I'm not quite as sold on Pierce's star potential as Sanchez and Houston. He was a much lower rated player coming out of high school, but I still think there is a path to stardom for him as a player who can win with instincts and intelligence. At 6'2", 223 pounds, Pierce was a 4-star prospect out of Lucas, Texas, the number 204 overall player in the 2024 class, according to 24/7 Sports. In a reserve role last season, Pierce was pretty productive. He played 263 snaps. He finished with 43 tackles, 1.5 tackles for loss, an interception, and a forced fumble and recovery. Pierce's PFF grades last season were stellar. 82.2 overall, 83.8 against the run, 81.9 in tackling, and 75.4 in coverage. There's really nothing he didn't do well. And like Sanchez and Houston, Pierce's best game of the season was the playoff quarterfinal against Miami. He finished that game with an overall PFF grade of 97.5, a near perfect rush defense grade of 99.9, and a tackling grade of 76.1. Pierce forced and recovered a fumble on Miami star running back Mark Flesher in that game. That was a huge play. Now, I assume Pierce will wear the green dot and call the plays for the Ohio State defense in 2026. He's probably going to suffer a little bit in comparison to Sonny Styles, who was a top 10 NFL draft pick. But I think Peyton Pierce can be a great player in his own right this season. Now, some of you might be wondering why I didn't include defensive end Bo Atkinson, linebacker Riley Pettijohn, or safety Leroy Roker on this list. And I think all three have the potential to be impactful players for the Buckeyes this season. In the case of Atkinson, he actually has the most career sacks, 12, of any player currently on the roster. The problem is all but one of those were at North Carolina. And look, Atkinson is headed into year 4 of his college career. To me, he looks like a solid rotational player, but not someone that's going to raise the ceiling of the 2026 Buckeyes. I'd be very happy to be wrong about that. Now, I think sophomore linebacker Riley Pettijohn has all the measurables to be a future star at Ohio State, but he only played 77 snaps last season. And he was not a full participant in spring practices this year because of an injury. He also has Christian Allegro standing in his way this season, and by all accounts, the coaching staff has big plans for Allegro this season. I think Pettijohn is going to be a rotational player this year. He'll probably be the first linebacker in the game after Pierce and Allegro, but I think his path to stardom is in 2027. Finally, I think Leroy Roker is in a similar boat as Pettijohn. He played 82 snaps last season. He actually played 4 snaps in the CFP against Miami. There's a lot of promise there, but he's in a very crowded safety room with much more proven veteran players in Jalen McClain, Terry Moore, and Earl Little Jr. I mean, unless there are injuries, it's hard to see where the opportunities are going to come from for Roker this season. Like Pettijohn, I think Roker seems to be on a 2027 trajectory. So let's get back to the question of, do the 2026 Buckeyes have enough star power to survive a brutal regular season schedule and make another run to a national championship? I think we established that they do. Now, I don't think it's the depth of elite talent the 2024 or 2014 teams had, but I think it's going to be enough. I also think that coaching and scheme will have to be bigger factors this season than in 2024 and 2014. But if you're picking the Buckeyes to win a national championship, then you're probably banking on Matt Patricia and Arthur Smith, 2 former NFL head coaches, to be difference makers as coordinators for this team. Because I'm just not sure the Buckeyes will be able to overwhelm opponents with their personnel this season in the same way they did to win their last 2 national titles. Coaching and scheme will likely have to play bigger roles than it did in 2024 and 2014 if the Buckeyes expect to win their 10th national championship. Okay, that's going to do it for me. Thanks for going on that journey with me today. I'll have a lot more to say about the prospects of the 2026 Buckeyes as we inch our way to fall camp. Look for another pod from me in the coming weeks. Until then, thanks so much for listening, and go Bucks. You've been listening to the South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast. Follow us on X at South_Stands.